Hey, sixth grade. We're moving right along. We're on chapter 19 of Bud Not Buddy, written by Christopher Paul Curtis. Um, I'm going to read the chapter out loud. You need to follow along on your own. And then afterwards, we'll discuss what happened in our chapter. Okay, it's getting good. We're coming towards the end of our book. Chapter 19. Man, ever since he heard me call my mama's name, Herman E. Calloway had locked himself up in his room and wouldn't come out. Mr. Jimmy and Miss Thomas made me sit in the kitchen table whilst they knocked on his door and tried to talk him into opening it up. But the way they kept saying Herman, soft at first, then louder and louder, it sounded like he wasn't talking back. After the longest while, they decided to let the big baby have his own way and came back downstairs. They sat at the kitchen table with me. Miss Thomas looked at me and said, My, my, my. Mr. Jimmy said, Now look here, Bud. He wiped his hand over his face. You sure your mama's name was Angela Janet? I said, Yes, sir. And the two of you had the same last name? Her last name was Caldwell, too? She never said nothing about being no Calloway? I spelt out for him. No, sir. Her name was Caldwell. Caldwell. It seemed like he finally believed me. He said, Okay. I hope you don't mind me asking, Bud, but it's pretty important that we know. How'd your mama pass? And how long ago was it? Pass was just like gone. It was another one of those words grown folks used instead of dead. I said I was 6 years old when it happened, sir. I don't know why. She was too sick to go to work for 6 days in a row. Then one morning I went into her room and she was dead. But she didn't suffer or nothing. It happened real quick. She didn't even have time to close her eyes. She didn't look like it hurt or nothing. Miss Thomas reached across the table and touched my arm. She said, I'm sure it didn't, Bud. I'm sure it was very peaceful for her. Mr. Jimmy said, when she was living, Bud, God rest her soul, what'd your mama look like? This was another strange question. But before I could answer, Miss Thomas said, James, what are you insinuating? I knew there was something familiar about this boy. I don't know how I missed it before, but look at Bud's eyes. You have to ask if this is Herman's grandchild. Mr. Jimmy said, Now hold on, Grace. I'm just trying to ask the questions I know Herman asked if he could. Ain't a thing wrong with being certain before we jump to any conclusion. Now, what she looked like, son? I said, She was real pretty, sir. Mr. Jimmy said, I bet she was, Bud, but that ain't what I mean. Was she short or tall? Was she slim or big bone? I said, I don't know, sir. She was real pretty and real tall and kind of skinny like me, I guess. Miss Thomas says, James, Bud was 6 years old. Anyone on earth was real tall to him. I don't see the point in all of this. I said, Pardon me, ma'am. I know how I can show you what she looks like. I still got her picture. They just stared at me. I said, Can I be excused? Miss Thomas says, Yes, son. Hurry up and go get that picture. I busted up the stairs, but stopped like I hit a brick wall. I remembered how mad Mr. and crazy Herman E. Galloway looked when he yelled at me. I tippy-toed up the rest of the steps. Uh-oh. Mr. E. Calloway's door was open up a crack. I held my breath and tiptoed extra quiet, extra fast, right into the little dead girl's room, and as soon as I did, whoop, zoop, sloop, my heart jumped down to my stomach. Herman E. Calloway was sitting on the little chair in front of the little mirror on the dressing table. His elbows were on the table, with his face was all covered by his hands. It sounded like he was having trouble breathing, 'cause every time he sucked in a bunch of air, he made it sound like, ugh. And every time he blew air out, he made it sound like, uh-uh. I didn't know what to do. I could tell Mr. C didn't know I was in the room with him, so I could probably just backward tiptoe and get out of there without anything happening. I rose up on my toes, took two baby steps back, and stopped. Shuck, I'd come up here to show Miss Thomas and Mr. Jimmy what my mama looked like. There wasn't nothing wrong with that. I wasn't doing nothing that meant I had to sneak out of this room on my tiptoes going backwards. I sucked in a mouthful of air and walked over to my bed. I picked up my sax case and set it on top of the bed. I pushed the two silver buttons to the side, and the two silver tongues jumped open and made those loud click-click sounds. Herman E. Calloway still didn't take his face out of his hands. He just kept, uh, uh, uh. I reached inside my sax case and took out the envelope with my mama's picture in it. I closed the two silver tongues again and could tell that Mr. C wasn't paying me no mind at all. He kept his face in his hands. His head was rocking up and down real slow, sort of like he was checking to see how much it weighed. I put my sax case back next to the bed and was about to leave the room when I looked over at Herman E. Calloway's back. He still didn't know I was in the room. I looked in the little round mirror and still couldn't see his face, but I could see his hands a lot better. I could see 6 little trails of water coming out from where his fingers joined up with his hands. The 3 trails from each hand joined up together on his wrist and ran down his arms, puddling up on top of the dressing table. Shucks, Mr. E. Calloway was bawling his eyes out. He was acting like me before his grandson was the worst news anyone ever could give you in your life. This was number 39 of Bud Caldwell's Rules and Things to Have a Funner Life and Make a Better Liar Out of Yourself. Rules and Things number 39. The older you get, the worse something has to be to make you cry. With babies, it's easy not to pay them no mind, because crying's just like talking for a baby. A baby's tears might mean, hey, you just stuck a pin in my behind when you changed my diapers. Or their crying might be the way they're picked out to say, good morning, mama. What are we going to do today? That makes it easy not to care too much about a baby's tears. When you got an old person crying, you got a whole nother story. When you got someone as old as Herman E. Calloway crying, you better look around, because you know you're square in the middle of one of those boiling tragedies. You can't help but feel sorry for him, even if he's been mean to you from the minute he first had eyes on you, even if he's crying because he found out the two of you were kin. I walked over to Herman E. Calloway, and before I could think, my hand moved out towards his back. I waited for one of those spaces between the mun and the hun. Then I touched him. His skin under his shirt was very, very warm. It took a second for Herman E. Calloway to know someone was touching him. When he knew, I felt his skin jerk and twitch the same way a horse does when a fly lands on it. He whipped his head around. When he saw it was me, he jerked away, took one more giant hunt, then stared. His mouth started moving like he was talking in a secret language that only dogs could hear. At last, real American words started coming out of his mouth. He said, I'm so, look, buddy, it's Bud, not, sir, not Buddy. He put his face back in his hands and broke down all over again. Man, it's a good thing the thug wasn't around, because if he'd heard the way Mr. C was weeping, no one would have wondered who the real Waterworks Willie was. I put my hand back on Mr. C's shoulder and patted him and rubbed him a couple of times, then left the room. It felt a lot better going out frontwards instead of sneaking out backwards. I ran down the steps back into the kitchen. Miss Thomas's and Mr. Jimmy's eyes jumped right into the envelope. I set it in the middle of the table. Both of them just looked at it before Miss Thomas reached out and picked it up. She went into the pocket of her dress and took some funny little glasses that only had a bottom half to them, then put them on her nose. She pulled Mama's picture out and held it as far away from her eyes as her arms would stretch. She looked at the picture, looked over her glasses at me, then she looked right at Mr. Jimmy and said, "Any more questions for this young man?" She slid the picture over to him. Mr. Jimmy picked it up and said, "Well, I'll be. Remember that old coon man who used to drag that ruined horse through town? Now, what was his name? Help me out here, Grace. Didn't he call his act Joey Pigus and his broke back, bronconing bucko?" Miss Thomas says it was Joey Pegas and his broke back, bucking bronco, James. What else do you see in the picture? Mr. Jimmy said, That's definitely is Angela Janet Calloway. He looked at me and said, "You sure this is your mother?" I said, "Yes, sir, but her name's Caldwell, not Calloway." He said, "Well, I'll just be." Miss Thomas butted in on him. There's little doubt about that, James. But what we've got to do. She kept on talking, but I quit listening because something just came out of the blue and give me a good whop right up on the forehead. Without even thinking about what I was doing, I butted in on Miss Thomas and said, "That means that's not some little dead girl's room I'm sleeping in. That's my mama's room." She looked at me kind of surprised, but like this was the first time she had that thought too. She said, "That's right, Bud. You're back in your mama's room." I said, "How come Mr. E. Calloway never called on me and my mother? All he'd have had to do was call on us one time, and I know she would have been so sad. She wouldn't have been so sad." Miss Thomas and Mr. Jimmy took turns shooting quick looks at each other. Then she said, "But give me your hand." Uh-oh. Pretty soon I'd have to come up with a rules and things about when Miss Thomas holds your hand. She stretched her arm across the table and held on to her fingers. "But," she said, "Mr. C, excuse me, your granddad didn't know anything about you. No one knew where your mother had gone." Mr. Jimmy said, "That's right, son. She just up and run off one day. I mean, we all knew Herman was hard on her, but it wasn't like it was nothing personal. He was hard on everybody. I used to tell him all the time to slack off some on the girl, to go easy, but I can remember his exact words. He said, 'Easy go don't make the mare run.' This is a hard world, especially for a Negro woman. There's 100 million folks out there of every shade and hue, both male and female, who are just dying to be harder on her than I ever could be. She's got to be ready. Shoot." I could see that the girl wasn't the type to. Miss Thomas said, "James, why don't you go up and check on Herman?" She said, "Why don't you?" But it wasn't a question. Mr. Jimmy said, Oh, maybe I should," and left the kitchen. Miss Thomas told me, "Bud, I know you can see your granddad has trouble getting along with most folks, right?" "Yes, ma'am. I think it's because he expects too much out of everybody, himself included. And when you set your standards so high, you get let down a lot." I shook my head up and down, acting like I understood. She said, "Now take your mother, for instance. He was so proud of that young woman, and he loved her very, very much. He was determined that she was going to be the first Calloway to get schooling all the way through college, so he thought he had to be strict on her. But he went overboard. But simple as that. He used to crow about how his mother and father had been born slaves, and how now it was only 2 generations later and the Calloways had come so far and worked so hard that one of them was actually going to be a teacher. It was his dream, not hers. Not yet, anyway. and he never gave her time to pick it for herself. The more he pushed her, the more she fought him. Finally, it got to be too much, and she left. We think she ran off with one of Herman's drummers. We've been hoping for 11 years that she'd send word or come home, and she finally has. Looks to me like she sent us the best word we've had in years. Miss Thomas smiled at me, and I knew what she was trying to say. I was the word that my mama had sent to them. She said, "Wait here for a second, Precious. I've got to go to my room for something." Miss Thomas was probably saying that to excuse as an excuse so that she could go blow her nose and cry. But she came back in a flash. She was holding an iron picture frame and handed it to me. "This has been on my dressing table for 13 years, Bud. Ever since your mother was 16 years old. Now it belongs to you. I wanted to say thank you, but I just stared at the picture in a heavy iron frame. It was Mama. The picture only showed her head. All of the edges, it was, around the edges, it was smoky or foggy, so that it looks like Mama poked her head out of a cloud. And Mama was smiling, the same soft smile she'd given me when she got home from work. It'd been so long since I'd seen Mama smile that I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. Miss Thomas said, "Let me show you something, Bud." She took the frame out of my hands and said, "Watch this." She moved the picture up and down, right and left, and then around in circles. Do you see how her eyes are on you all the time? No matter which way you look at the picture, she's watching. It seemed like Mama was looking direct at me, no matter where Miss Thomas put the picture. I can keep this? I feel like I've been holding on to it until the rightful owner came along, and it looks to me like it's finally shown up. What took you so long, child? Miss Thomas patted me underneath my chin. She said, Bud, we've got a problem I'm going to need your help with. Uh-oh. You said you were 6 years old when your mother died. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so that was 4 years ago. Yes, ma'am. You can remember how bad you felt when you first knew she was gone, can't you? Yes, ma'am, because it still feels the same. Well, you've had 4 years to heal that scar, but it still hurts some of the time, doesn't it? Sometimes a lot. I know, Bud. But remember, your grandfather and I just found out that she passed. The hurt is brand new for us. Miss Thomas started swallowing. And even though he hasn't seen her for 11 years, I know there isn't a day that goes by that he doesn't think about her. He never admitted. But there isn't one show that we give that he doesn't first look out to the audience and not see how big the crowd is, but hoping that she'll be out there, hoping that she'd have seen a flyer tacked to a telephone pole somewhere and would stop by to see him. He loved her so much, Bud. Sorry, sweetheart. She took the hand she wasn't squeezing my fingers with and took out a handkerchief and blew her nose. These notes that he picks up everywhere, these stones that he picks up everywhere he performs are for her. She must have been 4 or 5 years old. The band was getting ready to travel to Chicago for a week, and before he left, he asked her what she wanted him to bring back for her. He was thinking a doll or a dress or something, but she told him, "A walk, Daddy. Bring me back a walk from Chicago." So everywhere we went after that, he'd have to get her a walk. He'd write the city and the day we were there on them for her. He's got boxes of them upstairs, 11 years worth. So, Bud, I don't know how Herman is going to feel after this, but I need your help. You've got to remember that both Herman and I love your mother very much, as much as you do. This doesn't seem like it could be true, not just because it didn't seem like anyone could love my mother as much as I do, but because it doesn't seem like Herman E. Calloway could love anyone at all. Miss Thomas said, so if you can remember, Bud, be patient with him. That unreal man upstairs is very, very hurt right now, and I just can't say where he's going to land after the news gets through blowing him around. Miss Thomas was starting to do that stingy-eyed blinking. So we're going to have to give him some time. We're going to have to let him find out how he feels before. Mr. Jimmy came into the kitchen. Grace, he said, he wants you. Herman E. Calloway was making everybody feel like they had the blues. It looked like Mr. Jimmy just wiped some tears from his eyes, too. Miss Thomas came around to my side of the table and gave me a hug. She said, "You okay?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Should I go see how he's doing?" "Yes, ma'am." She left the kitchen and Mr. Jimmy went into the living room. I picked Mama's picture up and put it back into the envelope. Mr. C chose a good name for his house, because not a second went by before the back door came open and the dusky devastators of the Depression walked in, talking like it was going out of style. As soon as they saw me, they all got quiet. Doodlebug said, "Hey, Sleepy LeBone, where's everyone at?" I didn't want to embarrass anyone by saying that all the grown folks were sitting all over the house sobbing their eyes out, so I said, "They're around." I remembered not to call the band sir. Steady said, "Well, it's you we wanted anyway." He put an old cardboard suitcase on the table and said, "I told the fellas how hard you've been hitting that recorder and how proud I was of you. So we put a couple of nickels together." He acted like he was yelling into the other room. "And Lord knows, on the peanuts we get, it was a real sacrifice." He slapped some skin with Dirty D, then started talking regular again. "Anyway, the thugs saw something at the pawn shop and we picked it up for you. Can I open it?" The thug said, "Well, if you don't, I don't know who will." Eddie slid the cardboard suitcase over in front of me. It looked worse than the one I used to carry around. One of the snaps on it was busted clean off and the other one was stuck. Steady said, "It's what's inside that's interesting. Just pull on that snap real hard." I pulled on the snap and it came off right into my hand. The thug said, "I knew it. The boy's just too country. He ain't used to handling fine merchandise. We should have given it to him in a paper bag." I opened the suitcase. Whatever it was wrapped up in a crinkly, wrinkly newspaper. I started pulling papers off and I could tell that their gift was real heavy. All of a sudden, a shiny piece of gold showed through. I snatched more paper off and couldn't believe my eyes. The dusky devastators of the Depression had put their money together and had bought me a baby-sized horn like Steady Eddie's saxophone. Steady Eddie could see I was stuck, so he lifted out the suitcase and fished around in the bag for a mouthpiece, the neck, and the reed holder. And he took the reed for me, put the horn together, and then played it. My horn sounded great. Eddie said, "It's an alto, bud. There's a little rust in some of the seams, but that's to be expected with a horn that's old. It's still got a good tone to it. The dent didn't do her off too much." He showed me a big dent on the bottom part of my saxophone. I repatted, refelt it, and resprung it. "The rest is up to you." He reached in his pocket and took out a can that said brass on the side. "Get you a rag and shine her up. A man should polish his own horn." I looked at my bandmates and said, thank you very, very much. I'll practice on this so much that I'll be as good as you guys are in about 3 weeks." Doodlebug said, "Oh, now that's cold." I said, "Really, I will." The band laughed, but so did I. Eddie said, "Well, Mr. LeBone, I'll tell you what, since you're so hot to get in this band, I better get you started on lessons right away." He pulled a big silver watch that was tied up to a long chain out of his pocket and said, "I'm going by for Wow now. But I'll be back around 7. If you've got your sax polished up by then, I'll bring home some sheet music along and we can get started. Sound good? His toothpick jumped with each word. Sounds great, Steady. Eddie took the strap off of his neck and handed it to me. I put it on Eddie's hand, and Eddie handed me my saxophone for the very first time. It was the perfect weight. I said, "Can I be excused?" Dirty D said, "What? You ain't gonna blow us some notes? We want to hear what you got, Mr. 3 weeks from now." I said, "I'll let you hear me in 3 weeks when we're all on stage together." They laughed again, and Doug said, "I'm gonna let you in on something. Sleepy LeBone, there are certain members of this band that you will have to be out playing in 3 weeks, but it's gonna take you a whole lot longer to top me. On the real tip, it's gonna take you at least 10 years before you'll be able to even hold my drumsticks." Steady Eddie said, "Yeah, that's about 9 years and 10 months longer than you'll be with the band, Thug." The Thug said, "Oh man, you ain't gotta start that up again. You gotta let me know what you heard." I said, "Can I be excused?" Eddie said, "Head on, Sleepy LeBone. I'll be back." I told my bandmates, "Thank you again. Thank you very much." The Thug said, "Nothing to it, little man." Dirty D said, "Now, don't let that horn whip you in." Doodlebug said, "Our pleasure, Sleepy." And I'm going to stop right there.